I watched as my mother bustled around the room. She always intensified her activity when she was upset or had something on her mind. This time I didn't need to guess the cause of her distress. "Are you sure you'll be all right on your own?" she asked, looking at me with a worried expression on her face. "Yes, Mom, I'll be fine. It's only one night. I just want to make sure you have everything to hand." She smiled, nudging the overbed table closer to me. I stared at the array of stuff she had piled onto it. Landline, packets of biscuits, massive flask of coffee, water, meds. Finally she stops moving and stands looking down at me, hands clasped together. "I could always prepare a proper dinner for you before I go." "No, Mom, I'm fine. I'm practically bedridden, remember? I really don't need that much to eat." I watched with a pang of guilt as her face crumpled. "Sweetheart, the doctor said it would take time. You'll walk again." She reached out and took my hand. I wriggled it free. I was uncomfortable with compassion, even from my mother. "They didn't say I'd walk again, Mother. They said they didn't know." I picked up the remote control and switched on the television. A wave of anger washed over me as I flicked from one station to another. I couldn't bear to look at the concern on her face, the pity in her eyes. "Rachel, sweetheart, you've already made so much progress. You are walking. You've actually surpassed their expectations." "Yeah, Mom, you're right. I can just about make it to the loo," I snapped. "Takes me 10 minutes to get there, but if I time it right, all good." "No, Mother, that's not walking, that's shuffling. 3 months and all I can do is manage a slow shuffle. To be honest, I think the doctors were a little too optimistic." "I can stay," she offered, a hopeful look on her face. "Go home, I'm fine." I struggled to a sitting position. She rushed over to me and grabbing some pillows, she stuffed them behind me, plumping them up. "Thanks," I muttered, a hint of resentment in my voice as she propped my crutches against the wall by the head of my bed. "Just be careful when you get out of bed. Don't rush." "Rush?" I laughed again, a bitter sound even to my ears. "Is that a joke?" God, I was being a bitch, and I knew it. I just kept lashing out at the people I loved the most, the people who loved me the most. My friends had disappeared one by one. None of them called anymore. Sure, they had all visited me in hospital where I was safely contained. But as soon as I got home, the calls became less and less, visits non-existent. I don't know, maybe they were uncomfortable with me, my disability, or maybe they were just fair-weather friends. It made me so angry to think how they had all abandoned me. You would think I would be extra nice to my parents in hopes that they would not turn their backs on me. But no, perversely, that's not how it works. I just kept pushing them away, and I wanted to cry and beg their forgiveness and tell them I loved them and how grateful I was, but I just couldn't. Instead, this monster bitch emerged. "Oh, and the physiotherapist will be by tomorrow evening, but I'll be back by then to let her in. Do your exercises and, "Yes, Mother," I interrupted. "You said..." There she was again. What a bitch. "You have your panic button?" I nodded towards it on the bedside table. I watched her walk to the door, a lump in my throat. She turned and looked at the wheelchair parked at the bottom of my bed. "Perhaps you could sit in your chair for a bit, watch television. Looking at the world from a different vantage point might, elevate your mood." She wheeled it closer to me. "Maybe." I gulped down the lump, blinked back the tears. "I love you. See you tomorrow, sweetheart." "I love you too. I love you so much," I wanted to say, but the anger in me bubbled and buried the words deep. I nodded instead, and then she was gone. I listened as she mooched around downstairs, checking on things, closing doors, and finally the front door shut and locked behind her. I gave a sigh of relief, and yet side by side with that feeling was a sense of loneliness. Then the beginnings of fear took hold, fluttering deep in the pit of my stomach. The complete and utter vulnerability of my situation engulfed me. I sank back deeper into the oversized pillows. It was the first time I'd been alone after getting out of hospital. As I stared out the window, I recalled the neurologist's bleak prognosis. The truth of the matter was that the 10-minute slow, painful shuffle to the bathroom was as good as it might get. Doctors were never going to get your hopes up. They always seemed to give the worst-case scenario. I stared at the TV, not really focusing on the images that flitted past, the constant drone of the news presenter. For some reason, I had become fixated on watching the news. I guess it was my only connection to the wider world, a a miserable world. Yet it gave me a certain amount of security to be and remain informed, no matter how bleak things were. I looked around the room, taking in the disability aids, fresh spring flowers. Every week my mother brought fresh flowers in from the garden. Once an overgrown mess, it had become her hobby along with caring for me. It was her hopes to get me sitting in the garden before summer. My father had extended my bedroom into the guest room. I now had a walk-in closet, built-in cupboards. I hardly recognized the place when I returned from the hospital. The DIY hadn't stopped upon my return. It was as if they were on a mission to renovate the house, as if somehow fixing the house would fix me. They had done their best to provide me with every comfort and adaptation to aid my recovery, even a new PC, anything and everything to encourage me to get out of bed. I suddenly felt trapped. An overwhelming need to get out of this room overcame me, and it occurred to me that maybe I could do better if no one was here, watching my every move with their soft, encouraging compassion and pity. I actually didn't want them to witness my clumsy attempts. I wanted them to see the results. Maybe it was best my mother had gone for the night. I might even call her and tell her to stay away for a few more days. I knew she would fuss and take it as rejection. But that wasn't it at all. It was about being forced to look for food, forced to move. She had waited on me hand and foot for 3 whole months. I imagined my mom's surprise when she returned and found me in my living room, sitting on my sofa watching TV, with a cup of tea that I had made for myself. Sure, she would deride me for navigating the stairs by myself. But imagine her delight that I had actually moved further than the bathroom. Maybe I could pay her and Dad back for all their love, dedication, and help myself in the process. Show them that it was worth it. I was worth it. That's how it went. One minute I was ready to take on the world. The next I just wanted to curl up in a ball and die. Today, however, it was different, more than a fantasy. After the initial panic, being alone strangely made me want to be stronger, get better. I was determined to get down those stairs. I took my meds and dozed off with a smile on my face. I don't know what woke me up, the persistent ringing of the phone or the panicked yelling outside my window. I was confused, groggy from the pain meds. I reached for the phone. My mother's hysterical voice assailed my ears.
Rachel, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. What's wrong? I propped myself up on my pillows, then with some difficulty reached for the light pull.
I've been calling for the last 10 minutes. Your father and I are coming over.
And then she hung up. I stared at the phone confused. The yelling outside intensified. I lay there for a minute trying hard to work out what was going on. Was it another riot? I struggled to raise myself onto my knees. They almost buckled under my weight. I winced in pain, gritting my teeth. I pulled myself up using the windowsill as leverage. Putting most of my weight on my elbows, I peered out at the dimly lit street below. I could see dark silhouettes of people running, yelling. What were they running from? Why was my mother so panicked? I squinted as I saw large shapes like dogs running alongside the people, as big as wolves. It was as if the dogs were all on some hunt together, chasing something. The flickering dimmed street lights distorted shapes. They seemed to merge into each other. Then I saw the first panicked person go down, then another. The dogs were taking them down one by one. It was a hunt, all right, but the people were the hunted. It was as if they had been herded into my cul-de-sac to be slaughtered. It suddenly dawned on me. Those weren't dogs, but people running on all fours. I was sure of it. A man darted into my driveway and hid behind my car. He looked up at me, and then he made a dash for my front door. I saw some of the pursuers break off from the main chase and swerve towards him. He reached my door and began banging on it. Then they were upon him. I ducked down and away from the window before the pursuers saw me. My knees suddenly went weak. The atrophied muscles had had enough. They buckled and I flopped back down onto my bed. My heart was hammering in my chest. I was unsure of what I had seen. Fear clutched me as I tugged at the curtains, trying to close them from my prone position. I lay there for a while trying to process. The banging still echoed in my head. I was terrified people or the creatures that pursued them might get in. I listened for more banging or the breaking of glass. The man had stopped screaming long ago, and all I could think of was his mangled body outside my front door. I was sure he was dead. I wanted to peer out again, see what was happening, but I was too frightened. Afraid I would look out and there would be a sea of faces, those things staring up at my window, at me. I was petrified. My fingers curled around the remote control and I turned the TV up ever so slightly. I listened to reports flooding in. The intermittent screaming outside was distracting me. It was distant now, but I jumped at every sound and would mute the TV. Then when I felt an unseen danger had passed and all was quiet again, I would unmute it, continue to watch the reports. I tried my parents' phone time and time again, willing them to pick up. I texted them frantic messages to contact me, to stay where they were. I would be fine, but I didn't know if I would be fine. I didn't know if any of us would be fine. I hunkered down, covering myself with my duvet, as if that would somehow protect me from whatever was happening, protect me like it used to from the monsters when I was a child. I wanted to cover my head and hope it would all go away. I peered out at the television. Mainstream media was vague, unsure, not giving me definitive answers. The news was touting it as riots, social unrest. Those things were more than social unrest. Those things out there were not disgruntled people. I sat up, and pulling my laptop towards me, I began to scroll through Facebook posts. I heard the news presenter advised to stay indoors until further notice. I glanced at my phone to see if my parents had replied. Nothing. Panic posts as people uploaded videos to Facebook and Twitter. I clicked between platforms. Some speculated alien invasions, others the end of times. The most common thread that seemed to emerge time and again: zombies. I laughed out loud, incredulous. An outbreak of some sort of virus, contamination, people infected by something. My mind raced along with the posts in ridiculous directions. My eyes darted from my laptop back to the news and then back down to my laptop. So much information. My brain struggled. I began to click on videos. The pursuers, their clothes for the mane in tatters, hung from their torn, emaciated bodies, blood-soaked. I noticed some of them were headless, others eviscerated, entrails trailing behind them, and I clapped a hand over my mouth as my stomach lurched. I felt the bile rise. Amidst the mayhem and the cries of terrified people, I could hear a low rumble, growling almost. I had heard it before, when the creatures had attacked the man outside my front door. I tried my parents again. No answer. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I threw the duvet aside and grabbed my crutches. I had to stand up. I couldn't just lay there, cowering in terror. I needed to at least lock the bedroom door, barricade it somehow. I glanced across the room at my PC. I remembered my father proudly setting it up for me. I had been irritable and ungrateful. They had initially wanted me to move in with them after the operation. Of course I had refused, wanting to maintain my independence. I blinked away tears of regret. A profound sadness swept through me and I began to cry. I should have moved in with them. They were on their way here to save me, and I was here on my own, disabled, helpless. I could barely walk. If they were dead, it was my fault. I struggled to my feet. My legs were so weak. They could barely hold my weight. I teetered on the crutches, my legs buckling. I slumped back down on my bed, my head in my hands. I sat there for a minute listening to the odd muffled yell or scream from the street below. I gulped as my mind raced, imagining those things breaking in here and tearing me limb from limb. I was terrified. Fear and frustration at my disability overtook me. I couldn't even run. I didn't have the choice of flight or fight. Reaching out, I pulled my wheelchair closer to me. I heaved myself into the chair, panting with the exertion, and then wheeled myself over to the door. I shut and locked it. My dad had reinforced the door. No one would be getting through that anytime soon. He had only agreed to let me stay here if I allowed him to reinforce all locks, doors and windows. I wiped the tears from my face and looked around for anything to barricade the door. Nothing that I could possibly move in my condition. I sat in my chair clutching my laptop, watching the TV for a while as reporters went over the same events, the same sanitized footage. Every channel practically repeating the same warning to stay indoors. There seemed to be a partial news blackout. Surely they knew more than they were letting on. The last important update was the army were now patrolling the streets. I had heard gunfire almost an hour ago, popping sounds in the distance. It had terrified me at first. The thought of the army on our streets. The more footage I watched, the more comforting the sound of the gunfire had become. I almost looked forward to it, hoping that they had killed some of those creatures. It was us and them now. I wheeled myself over to my desk. Placing my laptop next to the monitors, I switched on the PC. It would be easier for me to keep up if I could view all platforms simultaneously. It was like my little control center. It made me feel in control. I didn't want to miss a snippet of information. I clicked on YouTube. Social media seemed to be more proactive as people posted one disturbing video after another. I must have sat there for hours, scrolling through them, reading the comments, calling, texting my parents. Dad was innovative, an ex-army man. He would know what to do, keep Mom safe. I was sure of it. I refused to answer the question that kept popping up in my head. Why had they not returned my calls? As soon as the thought entered my head, I would push it away and concentrate on yet another video. I rewound one particular video on YouTube and slowed it down by 50%. I was calmer now. My mind had built up a certain tolerance to the bloody scenes unfolding. I began to notice things that I hadn't before. There was something odd about the creature's spines, the positioning of their legs as they ran. The spines seemed to have elongated, their hips rotated forward. It must be a mutation. Humans couldn't run on all fours like that. I slowed the video down even more. As I watched their gait, something clicked in my head. I quickly searched cheetah running, then greyhound. There was an uncanny similarity which made my blood run cold. I stared at the TV, not really seeing it. When they were not running after someone, they were standing twitching, their limbs contorting, their backs arching, and I wondered how their spines didn't snap. Something else. My mind was suddenly piecing previous videos I had seen together. One particular poster caught my eye earlier. Shaky camera footage from an office building, I presumed. Trained on a woman, transfixed with fear, as panicked people and their pursuers raced past her. I was mesmerized by her terror, her inability to move. The pursuers on all fours ignored the woman or didn't see her. Then she began to scream, and still they ignored her. Then she began to run, and only then did their attention turn to her as she was brought down, buried under a pile of bodies, fighting each other to get at her. My hands shook as I viewed the video again and again. A man falters, stumbles and falls. The pursuers intent on him now ignore him as he cowers in a fetal position. The hordes of broken, twisted creatures jump over his prone body, not breaking their stride as they target other fleeing people. Video ends. More videos. I search for the immobilized, the paralyzed, the inert among the fleeing crowds. My attention is suddenly diverted back to the TV.
Breaking news.
The announcer declares.
Downing Street has issued critical alert. The outbreak has spread across England, Wales and Scotland. No reports of the outbreak in Northern Ireland or the Republic. The United Kingdom has been quarantined. There is a complete travel ban. Flights have been cancelled. There will be no flights in and out of the UK. All inbound flights have been diverted. The United States has offered assistance if needed.
The announcer seems flustered, her face red, sweating as wads of paper are thrust at her from off-screen colleagues.
You are advised not to leave your homes or offices. Please find a place of safety and remain indoors.
And then bleakly.
This is a state of emergency. I repeat, a state of emergency. All looters will be shot on sight.
She shuffles her papers.
It is not known the cause of the outbreak, but scientists are working around the clock to ascertain.
People on the ground knew it was an outbreak of some sort. And here was the bloody news trailing in last. My hands shook uncontrollably as I texted my parents again. I turned back to my laptop and began to type a post of warning. My frantic update is interrupted by a sound outside. I stop what I am doing, fingers poised over the keys. I listen. I hear my neighbour, Ian's door, close quietly. A sound I had become familiar with over the months. I didn't know him very well, never really got acquainted with him. Never really got acquainted with any of my neighbours prior to the accident. Maybe I should have. Ian and I had never got past a polite nod. Where the fuck was he going? I thought as I wheeled myself over to the bed. I cleared a space on the overbed table. Jesus, Mother! I exclaimed as I placed my laptop onto the cleared space. The street outside had been weirdly quiet until now. I could still hear the odd popping sound off in the distance. Navigating my wheelchair closer to my bed, I shifted myself from chair to bed, relieved there was no one to witness my awkward transfer. My neighbour Ian, trying to get into his car. I spied the pursuers in the distance, milling around on all fours. A twisted, grotesque parody of what were once human beings. The initial panic over, people now listening to the warnings to stay locked securely behind closed doors. Nothing left to pursue except the odd fool like Ian. They must have heard him quietly leave his house. The oddities approached slowly, their bodies closer to the ground, 4 of them, curious like cats crawling on their bellies, turning this way and that as if seeking out the source of the sound. They can't see him, their acuity only activated by fast motion, but Ian doesn't know that. He looks over his shoulder and sees them approaching, and I know what he's going to do. I can see it in his tensing muscles. I fling the window open and scream at him, "Ian! Freeze!" He looks up at me startled. He's given up with the struggle to get his keys in the car door. He looks over his shoulder again and sees the slow twitching shambling figures closer now. "Don't run!" And before I can say anything else, they have him in their sights. And as if my warning only reminds him that he can run, he begins to run. "They can't see you if you don't run," I mutter under my breath as I close the window on his petrified screams. I close the curtains on the gory scene that unravels. I sink back down on my bed as I text my parents another warning. I am calmer now, as I realise my disability will ultimately be my saviour. My instinct may be to run, but I knew that was never going to happen. I turned up the volume on my TV and watched the news as I waited for them to reply.